Hello, this is Daryl Ehrlich of the Billings Gazette, and this is part of our Vietnam Voices series, a project of the Billings Gazette sponsored by Masterlube, and it is September 16th, 2015 at about 3 p.m., and I'm joined today by Dale Lacher, and I want to thank him for coming in and sharing his Vietnam recollections and his story. He was in the Army. He served as a dustoff medic. That means a helicopter for folks who may not know what that means. And so we'll get to that in just a second. But I like starting at the beginning, Dale. So tell me about, you went into the Army July of 1968.
Yes.
But let's talk about life before 1968. What were you doing before July of 1968?
Well, I graduated from high school in late June of 1968 from Billings West High, and I joined the Army 6 days after my 18th birthday. I wanted to go in earlier, but my parents wouldn't sign the papers.
Right.
Last 2 years of high school, every afternoon I'd watch the news and I'd see the war, and I felt like, I needed to do something, and I wanted to go in, and my parents didn't want me to, but after you're 18, you can do whatever you want. So there I was.
Did you come from a military family?
My father was, not really. My father served in World War II. He was in the Battle of the Bulge, but he wasn't a career military man. He's like everybody in his generation. They served. I had three uncles who served. One was wounded on Iwo Jima. His wife is still living. She lives up in Great Falls. I had one who flew fighter planes in Italy and Europe, and he actually served in Vietnam later. He flew reconnaissance F-4 jets. He was still in the Air Force. And then I had one uncle who was in North Africa. So a tradition of service, but not really military careers.
Right. So your father, having been involved in a war, wasn't really hep on seeing his kid, his son. Okay.
Not even close.
Right. It's interesting because a lot of the vets that I've talked with have said, yeah, we knew, we watched the news, and their conclusion was, if I called to serve, I will, or may have even enlisted before they were drafted. But they certainly did so with apprehension and not necessarily eager to. You were.
I was. I looked on it as an adventure. Maybe I was naive and even maybe dumb, but I wouldn't change a thing. If I had to do over again, I'd do this. I'd do it again.
Okay.
And I did exactly what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So did you know what you wanted to be? Yeah. You wanted to be a medic in a dustoff helicopter.
I did.
Why? Why that particular job? There's a lot of jobs.
I wanted to be a medic, and I didn't want to be humping the jungle. And I thought flying would be an adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And but I for sure wanted to be a medic, and put that in my enlistment contract. But yeah, I just wanted to fly. I thought it'd be a big adventure, and it was.
Yeah, you probably didn't have an idea of how much of an adventure at times, but
no, I had a pretty good idea what I was getting into.
All right, fair enough. Did you? So you went into. That's interesting too. I'd like to just kind of tease that out a little. You went in saying this is what I wanted to be, and you added in your enlistment contract, and you got to do that. That's not that, or at least that's not a commonly heard story.
Well, not flying was not in my contract, but being a medic was.
Okay.
And I worked that out when I got to Vietnam. I was originally assigned to the 8th Field Hospital, and I was waiting to be introduced to the commanding officer and be formally processed into the hospital. I saw a dustoff land at the emergency room, and I saw him take off, and I watched where they landed over at the airfield. And I walked over there and presented to the orderly room and asked to talk to the commanding officer and asked if I could fly. And they happened to need a medic, and he had my orders changed, and I slept in the unit that night. I was in dustoff that night when the sun went down.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a pretty amazing.
Yeah.
That shows also some. You took a lot of initiative in that.
Well, I didn't know any better.
Did you? Okay, so let's talk. You enlist, and you. Where do you go for all of your training? Do you go down to Sam Houston, or?
I went to Fort Lewis for basic. Fort Sam Houston for field medic school, 10 weeks. And I went to airborne school in Fort Benning, Georgia, because I wanted to be airborne. And just, again, for the adventure, you know, I was 18. And then they sent me to Fort Carson, Colorado, to the 5th Infantry Division. And there I was just waiting, you know, for orders to go to Vietnam. I actually it took too long, so I put in a 1049 form to volunteer to go to Vietnam. While I was waiting, I went through their recondo school, which is like a 3-week ranger school. It was really, really tough for me. Told me I wouldn't have survived the real ranger school, but I did graduate from that. And when I got out, my orders for Vietnam were waiting for me.
What made that ranger school really tough for you?
Well, it was a recondo school, not ranger school, but it was just brutal. You're going, you know, 24 hours a day and on patrol and, you know, ambushes and being on one end of the ambush and then the other end of the ambush. And
right.
It was just a physically very taxing school, but it was fun too.
Right. Let's jump a little bit back to being a medic airborne. What's that? Tell me a little bit about what's we've heard a little bit from people who are medics. How does it change when you're an airborne medic?
Well, you just jump out of airplanes when they tell you to. But I wasn't assigned to an airborne unit. When I got out of jump school, they sent me to the 5th Infantry Division. A lot of guys I was with went to the 82nd Airborne and 101st Airborne, and but you know, not a great deal of difference. You know, those guys who were with the 82nd and the 101st, when they went to Vietnam, they were line medics, just like leg medics.
Okay.
Legs means no airborne.
Yep.
People who don't jump.
So did you did the what you were doing live up to what you had signed on for?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
What about kind of military? What about military life seems to agree with you, or what did you enjoy about that? Because some guys said it's tough, it's a different thing, but it seemed like you took to it pretty naturally.
Well, I was young, and you know,
right.
I was where I wanted to be and doing what I wanted to do, so I couldn't complain.
And you actually volunteered to and got orders. So the orders to Vietnam were what you had wanted.
Yes.
Okay.
I actually put in a 1049 form to go.
Right. And so you get out of training, and then where do you go? Tell me about your trip to Vietnam.
Well, I got before I went to Vietnam, I got a 30-day leave, so I came home and, you know, messed around, did a little fishing and visited my grandparents and all. And then, interestingly enough, my father lost his job 2 days before I had to get on the plane to go to Fort Lewis to get on the plane to go to Nam. He was a railway express agent here, and that company was going under. And they called him one day and said, you know, nothing personal. We pulled your name out of a hat, but don't come back from lunch. And 2 days later, I was gone, and so it was pretty tough for him.
Yeah.
But you know, I had to do what I had to do, and went to Fort Lewis, processed through there, then over to Yokota Air Base, Japan, to refuel, and then to Vietnam. We landed in Cam Ranh Bay.
What were your first impressions of Vietnam like? Yeah.
Really hot.
Yeah. Different than Montana.
It really
did it?
smelled bad.
What did it? So what made it smell like? What
Cam Ranh Bay is really a swampy area.
Right.
It's right on the coast, and I don't know, just rotting vegetation around it, and you know, it just smelled bad, and it was really, really hot.
Yeah.
That was my first impression.
and humid?
Yeah, it was humid.
Especially more so probably than Montana, I'm guessing.
Oh, yeah.
But you were down in Georgia though too, so.
Yeah.
You know.
Jump school.
Yep. So then you within is it that very close to that time that you walk over and become a dustoff medic, or when do you?
Well, I was in Cam Ranh Bay in the replacement company for 2 days, and then they gave me my orders for the 8th Field Hospital and flew me up to Nha Trang, which is just up the coast, next big town above Cam Ranh. And actually, when I landed in Nha Trang, there was nobody to meet me, and I didn't know where to go. I spent the night sleeping on my duffel bag in the parking lot at the airport. And then the truck came in the morning from 8th Field Hospital and took me.
Okay.
And that's when, you know, I was waiting to get to meet the CO
And went over.
went over to the 254th dustoff and asked if I could fly.
And they said, "Hey, this is great. We need a medic."
Exactly.
You're a medic.
Exactly.
So, what's the first? What's your first taste of being a? Do you remember the first time you go and do this in action? Or
I flew with another medic for about a week.
Okay.
And he showed me the ropes.
Okay.
Showed me what was expected of me as not just a medic, but as a crew member of the aircraft.
Okay.
Told me what my duties were, and then after about a week, I was on my own. We were a small unit. We only had 6 helicopters and 6 medics.
Okay.
So I was on my own after about a week.
Okay. What are your responsibilities besides just being a medic as a part of the crew?
To clear the aircraft, when we start, first of all, when we go off on a mission, I'd undo the rotor blade and then go put my gear on. When the aircraft commander, who flew in the left seat, got in, I'd close his armored plate on his seat, and then put my gear on and jump in the ship. I also was responsible for refueling it. I helped the crew chief with some of the maintenance. When we were on a hoist mission, the part of the crew is to clear the aircraft, to watch the trees, watch bushes, watch the tail rotor. You go on hot mic and you're talking to the pilot who's hovering the aircraft all the time to let him know the position of the aircraft relative to the trees, because he's got to focus. He doesn't move his head. When he's hovering in the trees, he's looking straight ahead at a fixed object as a point of reference to hold the aircraft still. And we constantly chatter and tell him, drifting left, drifting right,
And then he'd correct or
right.
It's
a team effort.
Yeah. Was it interesting work?
Oh yeah, I was never bored.
Yeah.
Never.
What's an average day like, or is there an average day?
There was no average day.
Okay.
We weren't assigned to fly every day, but if you were assigned to fly, you'd go out and get your gear ready and be able to jump on the ship and go at a minute's notice. We had a siren that went off in the unit whenever a mission came in.
Okay.
We actually didn't just fly out into Trang. We had field sites as well, where we'd send a helicopter for about a week or so. And when we were flying out of the field, we were just, there all the time.
Right. And flying out of a field, that meant that you were providing medical transportation for some kind of mission, if there was one, right?
Right.
I mean, so...
Right. It just spread out our unit to cover a larger area.
Right.
We flew out of Phan Thiet, Bami Tuat, which is near the Cambodian border, and Tuiwa.
Okay. Was it, and so when you were, there were times when you were in the field then too?
Oh, yeah.
Kind of.
We'd go out for a week at a time. And
okay.
Yeah.
How did you, because does your helicopter become your base, or are you at a base, or how do you?
We had a hooch. We slept we'd had a hooch in Phan Thiet and in Tuiwa. Bami Tuat, we slept at a little fire base where gunship company was, and we had our own little hooch where we stayed.
Okay. So a lot of your job, I imagine, is responding to something else. So you wouldn't know, you're not flying necessarily specific missions. You're waiting for something to happen and bring people back then.
A mission would come in, we'd get the coordinates of where we had to go, and we'd just jump in the ship and go.
Okay. So it's a lot like, almost like a fire call or an emergency call.
Exactly like that. You never knew where you were going or when or...
Right. What was a busy day like?
Oh, the busiest day, I think, was the 1st of April, 1970. There was a lot of activity. A lot of places were hit at the same time along the Cambodian border. We were flying out of Bami Tuat, and we flew all that night and a good part of the next day.
How much time can you, do you just keep on flying and flying, or is there a certain amount of time at which you don't fly anymore just because you can't?
No, we'd fly until we needed gas, and then we'd gas up and go fly some more.
Right. So you that must not have been bad for a person who likes to fly and all.
There were no hours limits like today. Pilots have to rest after so many hours. That was not the case with us. We flew until we weren't needed anymore. Right.
Was the how many people could you get into a dustoff helicopter?
We could put in 4 litters. We had litter poles. We'd put 2 litters up on the poles and 1 litter on the floor. and we'd break that litter to make a little more room, and we could squeeze another litter in on the bottom. So 4 litter patients, but we had areas in the hellholes where we could put a couple of ambulatory patients, and if they were Vietnamese civilians or soldiers, they're smaller, and we could cram a lot of people in there. I think I had 13 people in once. So,
No, that's
sorry
okay.
about my phone.
No, that's great. That's one of the better ringtones.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're
I
fine.
don't know who that's from. Anyway, where were we?
So you could squeeze in more Vietnamese and probably fewer soldiers. When they came on board, did your job then change as the medic? Did you switch to attending to them rather than just the flight operations?
Absolutely. I'd kind of triage them as we brought them on board. We'd usually know what to expect because when the missions called in, they'd give us some idea of the level of injuries and the number of patients. It wasn't always the case when we got there, but I'd evaluate the patients as we loaded them, and then I'd start working on the first one that needed me the most, and then do what I could until we got where we were going.
Yeah. Did it? How long does it? I suppose it took, but how long does it take you to load with patients usually?
Not long. We were the crew chief would help, and people on the ground would help. We'd get in and get out just as quick as we could, and depending on the conditions. I mean, if it was a hot LZ, we were pretty quick getting them out and getting out.
Right.
But if it was just a regular, uneventful pickup, we'd be more relaxed.
Right. What when you picked them up, then where did you take? Then you had to take them to a field hospital, right? Or would you have to take them in?
We took them to the nearest medical facility. Sometimes that was a battalion aid station, like at Phan Thiet. There was one doctor and a couple of medics. That was a battalion aid station. In the Trang, we'd take them to the 8th Field Hospital. If it was a neurosurgical patient, we'd take them to Cam Ranh Bay or to Quy Nhon, because that's the only 2 places that had neurosurgeons. Bami Tuot, we'd take them to the dispensary there, where they'd be stabilized, and then another ship would come back, haul them to a hospital, a field hospital or an evac. We'd take them to the closest place where there was a doctor.
About how long was that on average? How long did it take you to get from an LZ to back to a
20 minutes roughly is about average.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
sometimes longer, sometimes less.
As a medic and you've got injured on board, does that 20 minutes go by fast, slow?
Yeah, very fast.
Okay.
Yeah, I worked as fast as I could. Mostly what I did was start IVs, put on pressure dressings, stop bleeding. Pretty basic first aid stuff, nothing fancy. I cut a couple of airways, a couple of cricothyroidotomies, but mostly it was IVs and pressure dressings.
Right. Did let's talk about the when you're doing that. Are most of the injuries bullets or shrapnel? Is that?
Blast injuries were the most common thing I saw.
Okay.
Traumatic amputations, multiple frag wounds, mostly blast injuries, quite a few gunshot wounds, but by far the major majority was blast injuries.
Okay. So mines or grenades.
Right. Traumatic amputations were a big thing I dealt with.
And you'd have to get them ready. You have to tourniquet pressure and get them ready, because you wouldn't actually. But you'd have to, when they got to a hospital or an aid station, they'd have to be ready to get. The whoever was there had to be ready to go.
Yeah. Well, the field medics did a lot of the work before I got there. They were really great, and they sometimes start an IV. Usually they were doing pressure dressings and stopping the bleeding, but by the time I got them, they'd already seen a medic, most of them, and been started on the process. Was
that a hard thing to do, to go? I mean, I know you're doing what you're love, but by the same token, you're also you're seeing the real results of war.
Oh yeah.
That must have been tough to see some of those.
Well, there were times.
yeah, I'm sure. Did was there a limit? There was a limit to how many people it could hold. So would you have to do multiple runs in sometimes?
Sometimes, yeah, we did. Yeah. And other times we'd bring in another ship.
Okay.
But for the most part, we were able to handle it by ourselves.
Yeah. What did could you hear anything when you're working on some of these guys? Could you have any conversation or I mean?
Oh yeah, we had radios, microphones, and ear, radios in our helmets, so we could talk amongst the crew.
Okay.
And I could hear the radio calls that the pilots were getting.
Okay. What about to the soldiers? Was it so loud? Did you do it?
It was pretty loud. You had to yell. I'd put my face down to their ear and pretty much yell because Huey is very loud.
Yeah, they're not quiet.
Yeah,
Are they?
and we flew with the doors open almost all the time too.
Right. Did and then so you would drop them off. Did you ever? One of the things that I think would be particularly challenging about being a medic is you're transporting a lot of people and you're just seeing you weren't necessarily a part of their platoon or company, so you may not have known them, and yet you're just transporting them. Did you ever find out or want to find out what happened to them? Very
rarely would I ever see a patient again. I remember one guy that he was in a fight up at Bamituit and he got knifed, and we dusted him off. And I saw him a few weeks later, and he was very grateful. He thanked me, and that was, I think, probably the only time I saw anybody who said thank you. But that was okay.
Yeah, well, exactly. I just thought that would be pretty hard. You're getting them for a crucial moment of their life, but you just
once we drop them off, I'm on to the next one, or I let go. I learned to let go real easy over there.
How do you do that? I mean, mentally, because I think I would see it and not be able to.
Just do it. I mean, you have to. You have to. You can't let it build up.
Yeah.
It'd be too much to deal with. No, I was there to do a job. I did it, and when I was done, I moved on to the next.
Yeah, yeah. What's the most complicated? Obviously, if someone's still living, you've got to try to keep them going. What's the most complicated thing that you would face? A situation that you would face.
The obstructed airway, where I had to cut a cricothyroidotomy. That was pretty. I carried a small instrument kit with me that was sterile, and I had to use it a couple of times, but. That's probably the most complicated. I did a couple of cut downs when I couldn't find a vein. I'd have to open the skin to find a vein. I had a little kit for that too.
Right.
But pretty much it was just basic first aid that any Boy Scout could do.
Right. Right. What did you think of when you finally kind of got to where you were going to be working from? With the helicopters, what did the country? What did it look like? I know you showed me some photos, but for people who didn't see those, what does it look like?
It's a beautiful country. Vietnam is an absolutely gorgeous country. And there's so many colors of green, and the ocean is just beautiful. It's pristine. Beaches. It's really a beautiful country,
right.
Especially from the air.
Okay.
The mountains were just gorgeous, rugged.
Right.
Huge boulders. It was pretty rough country, but just very picturesque.
Do you miss home in Billings?
Oh, sure.
Okay. What did you miss the most?
Probably seeing my parents, I suppose. I don't know. I didn't think about it much.
Did you have much communication with home?
We wrote letters back and forth, of course, and at one point I found a Mars station, which is a radio station, and I called my dad, and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning here. I didn't think about that, and then I tried to talk to him, but there was a minder on the radio, and pretty much everything I say, he said, you break in and say, you can't say that, Tried to tell him I'm in Tuiwa. He said, you can't say that. Like it's a big secret,
Right.
Who cares where I am?
Right, exactly.
But I did speak to him for about 15 minutes on the Mars station one time.
Right. Mm-hmm. Was it nice hearing a familiar voice, or at least a voice from home, or was it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. What's the when you're over there? Are you mainly you've got a medical mission to fly, so you're not necessarily combat, but I've heard so many stories about helicopters that the VC or the NVA would shoot at anything that would moved in the sky.
Oh yeah,
that happened.
Oh, we got shot up a few times with single rounds, and then we were shot down once.
Tell me about getting shot down. How did that happen?
Well, I was on a Korean hoist mission. We were flying out of Tuiwa, and we went in on the trees, went in on the smoke, and we were right over the smoke in the treetop level, and just all hell broke loose, and it sounded like somebody was outside the aircraft hitting it with a hammer. And of course, we knew what was going on right away. And the aircraft commander was hit. The guy in the right seat took controls right away and said, "We're coming left." And I looked out the left door, and there was this huge dead tree out there. He yelled, "Watch a tree, watch a tree." And he pulled a little bit of collective and popped over the tree. And we made it a couple of miles out before the helicopter wasn't going to fly anymore. We didn't crash, but we lost hydraulics and lost engine power, and he had to put it down. He did an auto rotation. While that was all going on, I popped the releases on the seat, the left guy's seat, the aircraft commander's seat, and pulled him out, put a pressure dressing on his wound. He was shot in the leg, the back of the thigh, and about the time we landed, another ship came in and got us, so we weren't there very long.
Right. So did they have to go and recover that, or what did they? Yeah.
Yeah, they had units that just went out and recovered downed aircraft, and they recovered it, I think, probably later that day.
Wow. That had to be unnerving, if not scary. I mean, were you scared at that moment?
Wasn't much time to be scared.
Sure.
But yeah, I was, when you hear that slapping outside, you just wonder where the next one's coming through, because the one you heard didn't bother you, because
Right, you heard it.
Right. But you wonder where the next one's coming through.
Yeah.
My crew chief was Tom Roberts, and he was holding the hoist control cable in his hand, the handle, and the cable was cut that far, just 8 inches from his hand by a bullet. I've got a picture of him holding up the cable and smiling. Yeah.
So it was just that close.
Yeah, for him, yeah.
Was this Vietnam, or was it the Viet Cong shooting at you, or is this NVA, or who?
Probably Viet Cong. I don't know. Yeah. They didn't say.
Fair enough. Fair enough. When that happens, is it hard getting back in the next helicopter?
No, not really. No.
Okay.
No. Like I say, we'd taken hits before. Usually just one. Somebody just shooting at random. But this was the first time we were right over them, and they just shot the hell out of us.
Did you? So you're able to get out of that area, though?
Yeah, we made a couple miles before the helicopter wasn't going to fly anymore.
Right, and I imagine because you have the radio on, you hear we're going to have to put it down somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you have wounded with you on that anyway, or you were just going to land in?
No, we were just going in. It was a hoist mission, so we knew we were going to have to hover in the trees, but we never got to get anybody out. One of our other ships completed the mission later. Right.
Right. But getting back in, you just got back in and you got another helicopter and kept on.
Well, we went back that night. The ship took us back. The one that picked us up took us back, and it was dark by the time we were flying into Nha Trang. I do remember looking out the front windshield of that helicopter and seeing the lights in Nha Trang and thinking how beautiful they were and how glad I was to see it. It was like coming home.
Yeah.
But we were down for a few days because we didn't have a helicopter, but they got us another one. We were up flying in a couple of days.
Did the commander ever come out? I mean, the guy who was shot?
Yeah, he did well. In fact, we found each other on Facebook a few years ago, and we communicate back and forth a little bit. Ray Greiner is his name, and we talked about it. He said he felt really guilty for almost getting us killed, and I told him, forget that. I mean, this was our job, and it wasn't his fault. No, he's a good guy, and he actually is an interesting fellow in that he, for many years, lived in Vietnam. He's in Hawaii now, but last year he was living in Vietnam and was teaching English to the Vietnamese. He's a pretty interesting guy. The guy who saved our lives was in the right seat. He's the one who took over the aircraft. He's the one we call Weird Eddie.
Okay.
I don't remember his name. I'd love to have met him or talked to him again and thanked him, but I just don't know how to get a hold of him. And I talked to Ray, and he couldn't find him either. But he grabbed the controls and got us out of there and saved all our lives that day.
So he was the pilot. He was sitting in the
Yeah,
left.
he was on the right side, on the pilot seat. A bullet had come in the chin bubble underneath his feet, and I've got a picture of the push-pull rod that goes from the foot pedals to the tail rotor, and it's about 2/3 cut by that bullet.
Right.
And if that thing had separated, we'd have lost the tail rotor and gone into a spin, and we'd have probably all bitten the dust. But he was able to finesse that helicopter out of there and get it down, and we all did fine.
Wow, that's quite. I mean, that's really flying.
Yeah,
I mean,
all those pilots were absolutely the best in the world. They were just awesome. Weird Eddie had this was like his third tour, and he'd flown Loaches before. I don't know if you know what Loaches are.
No, I don't know what
those little teardrop helicopters.
Oh yeah.
They'd fly in hunter-killer teams with the Cobras, and their job was to go down into the jungle and find the enemy, actually get shot at, so the Cobras would roll in and take care of the business.
So they were a bait.
Yeah.
That's almost a suicide mission.
Yeah, and he'd been shot down more times than he could count. I mean, he was just absolutely fearless. But no, those pilots were great.
Yeah, because UH-1 pilots, they're their own breed because it was really dangerous work. Someone was always shooting at you.
Yeah, not always, but enough.
Right. Is that a bad day when that happens? I mean, what's a bad day?
It was a great day because it turned out great.
Right. Did you have any bad days over there?
Oh yeah.
What's a bad day like?
There was one time when I thought we'd really bought the farm. We were flying out of Bamituit. It's the 1st of April, 1970, and it was the middle of the night. The Vietnamese and the Viet Cong or whoever had hit a Special Forces A camp on the Cambodian border, and they called us. But the weather was terrible. Most of my bad days were related to weather. Zero ceiling, raining. The only way we could get to the camp was to get above the clouds, and we had artillery bases fire parachute flares over the camp so we could get there. And then the only way we could get down through the clouds was to circle these parachute flares. Well, we did that, but when we broke out of the clouds, we were below the trees. And the trees were about 300 feet high there. But I looked out the windscreen, and all I could see was ground and coming up. Luckily, the pilot was able to flare and popped over the wire, and we landed in the compound. And when I got out, my knees were shaking so bad I could hardly stand up to load the patients. And that was probably my worst day, just weather-related and flying in bad weather.
Right, because if you would have hit any of those trees.
Well, we almost flew into the ground. We were in a nose-down attitude, circling, and we broke out, and the ground was just right there. And I thought, oh man, we're dead.
Wow.
But luckily, again, thanks to the skill and steel balls of that pilot, we survived and were able to help that patient.
Wow.
There were other times, but that was probably the closest I think I came to dying.
Right, and seeing the ground pretty quick.
Coming up.
Yeah. Yeah, is it when you're flying at night, let's talk about that, because what do you see? Because I've just heard nights over there are pitch black.
Yeah.
So how do you work at night?
Well, we flew blacked out.
Okay.
I had to, when I worked on a patient, I had to use a red filtered flashlight, which made starting an IV pretty difficult. But no, we always flew blacked out, and we always flew. We never turned a mission down, no matter what the weather, night, day, whatever. The guys on the ground would have a strobe light, usually to mark the LZ, and we'd come in on the strobe light. The pilot would flash the landing light for just a second, just enough to see the ground, land, and then turn it off. But yeah, flying at night was pretty hairy.
Right. How often did that happen?
All the time.
Okay.
I mean, we flew at night whenever we had to.
Yeah.
It was very common.
Right. So you said that you would do it again. So you consider your experience a good thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. It's a great experience, and I'd do it again.
What's the happiest memory you have?
Boy, that's tough. I guess coming over the mountains in the Trang and seeing the lights after we got shot down.
Yeah.
That felt pretty good.
Yeah. Let's talk about when you left Vietnam. How did you leave Vietnam?
Well, I left on the, what was it, about the 8th of July, 1970. We had a 4th of July party, a few days before. That's when they gave me that plaque, and they dumped me in a trailer filled with ice water and beer. That was kind of a tradition. After that party, it was kind of like I was already gone, and the guys in the unit were off doing their thing, and I was off flight duty and had nothing to do for 4 days, and I just kind of hung around and waiting for the day I had to leave, and then put my suitcase on the helicopter. They flew me to Cam Bay, and we did fly through the smoke, that little ceremony. But
tell me about that. Will you tell me about the flying through the smoke?
Well, whenever anybody went home from our unit, everybody would go out on the runway with a smoke grenade, different colors. And the helicopter would go down the runway and just kind of hover for a minute, and then we'd all pop a smoke. So there'd be, 8 or 10 smoke grenades going off. The helicopter would come flying through the smoke, and off they'd go. And it was just sort of a kind of a colorful send-off.
Yeah. And then was it hard for you to leave? Did you want to stay? I know that sounds
Part of me wanted to stay, but I didn't want to push my luck. You could extend your tour in Vietnam for 6 months and get out of the Army early, and I was tempted, but everybody in my unit who'd been killed was on an extended tour, and I was pretty lucky to make it through a whole tour, and I didn't want to push my luck, and I said, nah, I did my part. I'm going home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you flew out of, did you fly out of Cam Bay, or where did
right.
you? Okay.
The unit took me to Cam Bay and dropped me off, and I jumped out of the helicopter with my suitcase, and the pilot was kind of shocked because I ran around to the front of the aircraft, which is kind of a no-no because the rotor blades are at this angle, and you don't go in front of it. But anyway, I stayed right next to the fuselage, so I was safe, but I kissed the nose of the helicopter. And then I took off, and that was it.
Yeah. Did what was so you flew out of Cam Bay? What was that return flight from to America like?
I don't remember much about it. I remember everybody cheered when the wheels were up. After that, I don't remember. We stopped in Yokota on the way back to refuel. I remember coming into Washington, landing at McChord Air Force Base, and seeing those tall pine trees that are totally different from the trees in Vietnam, and I knew I was back.
Yeah. Was it a good feeling?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I was glad to be back.
Along the way, did you meet any of the protesters? Were there still
Not really. No, they took us to Fort Lewis from McChord, and they gave us a nice steak dinner, put us in some new uniforms, new Class A uniforms with our medals, and gave us a bus ride to the airport and a plane ticket home. Now, I didn't meet any protesters or anything like, some guys say they got spit on. And so
Yeah.
That didn't happen to me.
When you're over there, do you know about, you go over there late enough in the war that you know that the sentiment, that there's some opposition and dissent. Does that factor into what you did or how you did it over there, or do you
not at all.
Do you just not pay attention to it?
I just did my job.
Okay.
But I was a little confused. I mean, I was over there for the Cambodian Incursion, in May of 1970, and shortly after that was Kent State, and I couldn't believe that. I couldn't believe that those guys were shooting the students, even though the students were wrong, because we had to go into Cambodia.
Yeah.
And they didn't understand that, and they didn't expect them to, but shooting them down.
Right.
So yeah, I was aware of all that.
Yeah. Yeah. When you came back, what else did you still have time? Let's hear, you still had some time on your enlistment. So what did you do after you got home?
I had a 30-day leave, and then they sent me to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and I worked in the emergency room there for a year.
Okay.
Till I got out.
What's the difference between working as a dustoff medic versus working in an ER?
Well, the ER was fun too. I did a lot of sewing, a lot of suturing. I got pretty good at it, and they just put me in the back and send all the lacerations back there, and yeah, I had a good time. And when I wasn't working, my time was my own.
Right.
I got with the skydiving club at the University of South Carolina. I kind of needed something to fill that adrenaline
Rush.
need, you know.
Yeah.
So I took up skydiving, and I spent a lot of my free time with the students at University of South Carolina, jumping with them. We go down to Barnwell and jump down there.
That is an adrenaline fix.
It is.
Yeah. What is let's just I want to talk about that with in context of Vietnam. Is part of why you loved what you did, was part of it the adrenaline? Because it seems like it is
probably.
a go.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
But mostly what I did was I wanted to help those guys.
Yeah.
And, you know, I remember thinking, you know, I needed to go there and help those guys. And I did, and I'd do it again. But part of it was adrenaline, but most of it was just wanting to do something good and help somebody.
Yeah. What when you got back, I bet your father and mother, who may not have wanted to sign you up, they're happy you made it back.
Yeah, they were very happy.
Yeah. Tell me about the photo. I want to hear about the photo contest, because you have a photo contest. We should have a picture of it in the paper that accompanies this, but tell me a little bit about it.
Well, my mother sent me a care package, and she had newspapers in there packing, you know, this stuff. And in one of the newspapers was the Gazette photo contest. I think they had them every year. And, you know, I took a lot of pictures over there. Mm-hmm. So I just picked one that I thought was pretty cool and sent it in.
Okay. And what would describe the picture for me?
Oh, it's a little Vietnamese boy who was wounded when his village was attacked, and he had some minor scalp wounds, but he was an orphan, and he had no place to go, and he was wounded. So we took him to the province hospital. What I found interesting about that picture was the look of disbelief on his face, and the poor little kid, all he had was a shirt with a safety pin holding it together. And I thought that made for a interesting picture, if nothing else, but I felt sorry for the little guy. I did what I could. I cleaned him up, but he really didn't need any medical attention from me.
Right. Did you interact a lot with the Vietnamese people?
Oh, yeah. We flew a lot of missions for civilians. We didn't just fly for the American troops. We flew for Korean troops. We flew for South Vietnamese troops. We flew for civilians. We flew for anybody that needed us.
Yeah.
And we dusted off a lot of civilians.
And they're being caught in the middle of war, is that what?
Victims, yeah. They had it the roughest. I mean, the soldiers had it rough, but the people who really suffered in that war were the civilians, because they didn't even have a dog in the fight. I mean, they were just in the middle.
Right.
And I felt bad for them, because we had to take them to the province hospitals, which were very primitive. And we'd drop them off, and oftentimes they'd end up sitting in a hallway for hours before they'd even get seen. I felt really sorry for those poor people.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's an important part that I want to make sure we stop on momentarily. You're not just doing this. You're not just over there helping out other Americans. You're out there helping citizens
Everybody.
And civilians, and yeah.
Everybody who needed it. If we got called, we went.
Right. That's a great message too. Were the civilian injuries the same as soldier injuries?
Very much so.
Okay.
Multiple frag wounds, traumatic amputations, some gunshot wounds, burns. Yeah. I got a picture of a little baby that I was holding with burns on his scalp, and I dressed, and yeah, they were.
That's got to be hard too. I mean, when you're talking little kids and babies.
Oh yeah.
That's also so you're seeing now not only the collateral of war in as far as wounded soldiers, but wounded people.
Yeah.
Were people grateful when you came? I mean, when you came and answered the call for civilians in villages, what was their reception like to you?
Oh, they just got on the helicopter, and I took care of them, and they got off, and it's kind of like they were taking the taxi.
What? So there wasn't apprehension or something like, oh.
There was on some of them, especially the kids, you know, because they'd never been on a big noisy helicopter, and but.
What was the most exhilarating part of the job?
Oh, flying.
Yeah.
Flying and doing the tactical approaches to the LZ. We'd go in at a couple thousand feet and spot the smoke, and the pilots would flare the aircraft, slow the airspeed down, turn it over on its side, and just pivot down into the ground, flare at low level, and come in at 120 knots with skids going through the bushes. Yeah, flying fast and low was absolutely exhilarating.
Right. Did you ever worry, like, this isn't going to work?
No, I trusted those pilots implicitly. They saved my life every day.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's both a testament to their skill and also bravery, because I imagine
they were the best. They were. I hope you can get to interview a couple of pilots, especially if you can find a dustoff pilot or a gunship pilot. But they absolutely were the best.
Yeah. Was there a common thread was there a common trait that they all shared?
Steel balls.
Yeah, right.
If I can say
yeah, absolutely. No, they absolutely fearless. So when you were in downtime, when you weren't flying a mission, what were you doing?
Sometimes we'd have to watch the radios, take missions and copy them down and then hand them to the alert crews who were on. We had 6 aircraft. Usually 1 or 2 of them was out in the field site, so the other 3 or 4 were in the Trang, and 1 was designated first up, 1 was designated second up, and they'd take the missions that came in while the first up was out. And somebody had to be watching the radios all the time, and if we weren't flying, we were pretty much watching the radios or off duty and then just sleeping or reading or something.
What are your living conditions like?
We had it pretty good. We had hooches. The pilots had a old French villa in the Trang where they stayed. The enlisted guys, we had a hooch right there in the unit by the flight line, and we each had pretty much our own room. It was pretty good, pretty plush. Guys had stereos and fans, to keep the mosquitoes off and keep you cool at night. And we had relatively clean sheets. We had hooch maids who took care of our laundry, and yeah, compared to a lot of people, we had it made.
Yeah. What was the food like?
Not bad. We ate over at the field hospital when we were in the Trang. When we were out in the field, we ate wherever we could. There were usually a kitchen available, but no, it wasn't bad. It wasn't up to the Navy standards.
Right.
We had. I think I told you before, we landed on a destroyer. Actually, I was privileged to land on 2 destroyers during my tour, and those guys ate good. They had really, really good food.
Right, kind of made you a little envious?
And not really. I envied their food, but I didn't envy their jobs.
Yeah.
Because they were bored stiff, most of those poor guys.
Yeah. Was it boring in Vietnam?
Not for me. Not for me, but they'd sit off the coast and fire their guns into the inland and not even really knowing what they're shooting at or if they're hitting anything. And no, those sailors were just bored to death. At least that was my impression.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So after you got done doing being in the ER and you got discharged, then what?
I went to school. I promised my folks when I went in that when I got out I'd go to college, and they couldn't afford to send me. That was another reason why I didn't go. But I promised them I'd go, and I went to Montana State University for a year. I had to get out of there because I needed to get an education, and by that I mean there were too many distractions. Mm-hmm. I was not a very good student. I'd cut classes and go skydive. I'd cut classes and go fish. I'd cut classes and ride motorcycles in the mountains. I had to get out of there.
Okay.
So I heard about PA school and applied, and I was lucky enough to get into the PA program at Duke University, and was able to graduate from that in 1975. I've been working as a physician assistant in cardiovascular and thoracic surgery ever since.
So you parlayed that experience as a medic into what you do now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of the skills I needed then I need now, because concentration, being able to focus on the job at hand, being able to work long hours. Yeah, a lot of the same things I had to do then I need for this job too.
Did being a medic in Vietnam helped?
It definitely helped me. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to do this if I hadn't been doing that, because the PA program wouldn't have been interested in me. I think my experience in Vietnam is what got me into PA school.
Okay. Did you have a hard time transitioning from military life because you wanted to do that back to civilian?
I missed the adrenaline. I missed patience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it wasn't easy, but I didn't have it near as tough as a lot of guys did. I mean, I didn't end up with PTSD or any of that stuff that so many guys had. I was doing what I wanted to do, so I really couldn't complain.
Yeah. Did you ever think to yourself, this was more than what I had signed up for?
No.
Okay.
I knew what I was getting into.
Fair enough. Did you, when you came back home and you got back to life, what did Saigon fell, and how did that affect you?
It hurt.
Mm-hmm.
It hurt.
Yeah.
But it was beyond my control.
Absolutely.
And one thing I've learned is not to worry about what's beyond my control. I didn't like it, but nothing I can do about it.
Sure.
I did my part. That's all I can say.
You showed me a neat photo, and I've got to ask the story behind it. There's a dog. I want to hear about, because you had a dog that would fly some with you.
He was one of our unit mascots. His name was Baron, after Baron von Richthofen. He was there when I got there, and he was there when I left. I think he had more flight time than anybody in the unit. He was looked like a Labrador, but I think he was a mix. And he'd fire up a helicopter, he'd go out and jump in, and he'd fly missions with us, and he'd lay up on the equipment bag between the pilot seats, behind the pilot seats between them, and just stay there until we landed and get out and go about his business.
Yeah. Just as if he belonged there.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting to see the look on the patients' faces sometimes. They'd look up and see a dog there, and they couldn't believe it.
Right. I'm hallucinating too?
Yeah.
Did it help? I imagine.
I think they were glad to see him.
Yeah. In your medic, I've seen pictures of the medic bag, and there's a lot of stuff in it. Does your medic bag differ from any field medic's bag?
I carried mostly just pressure dressings and IVs and IV tubing sets, scissors, a few instrument kits for cut downs and for airways. But I carried oral airways. I had an ambu bag for breathing, to help guys breathe if I needed to bag them. But it's pretty basic. I had IV bottles. We didn't have the nice plastic bags that we have today. Back in those days, all the IVs were in glass bottles, and I had to tape them up with bandage tape because if they were hit with a bullet, they'd explode. So one of the first things that medic taught me when I first got there was tape your bottles, and I'd tape them up real good. If they got hit, they wouldn't explode.
I suppose I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, that glass would become very. What else did that medic teach you? What are some of the lessons that you have to learn to be a combat?
He taught me if we were in a village and the people were trying to swarm over the helicopter, a mass of people, level a rifle at them. Don't let them near the ship. And I actually had to do that once when I was flying with him, which he was very grateful for, because he was busy loading the patients, and there was like 20 people coming rushing. Because when you take a patient, a civilian Vietnamese, the whole family wants to come. Mm-hmm. And we couldn't have that. Plus, you never know if somebody's got a grenade, that they're going to drop in there. That was the thinking behind it. It never happened to me, but I heard of it happening. But no, that was one of the things he taught me.
So you gotta,
don't let anybody near the aircraft that doesn't need to be there.
Yeah. Was that hard to do? I mean,
no.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Did the kind of looking back, now that we've had 45, almost 50 years of experience, how do you see Vietnam today versus, is it any different for you, or how do you look at that whole experience, having been a guy?
Talking to Ray, that pilot that was injured and who lived over there, he says the Vietnamese people are, wonderful people, and he loves them, and they forgot all about the war. There's very few people in the country even who were alive during the war. They've really put it behind them. And I think capitalism has taken over that country pretty well. It's still a communist government, but it's a capitalist economy. And I think the people are benefiting from that. There's a huge tourist industry. I'd like to go back if I could afford it, but it'd be a pretty expensive trip. But no, I think they're doing okay.
Yeah.
I wish it weren't a communist government, but again, that's out of my hands.
Right. So you wouldn't mind going back someday?
I'd go back, yeah.
Yeah. What would you want to see there?
What I'd want to do if I had the perfect trip, I'd rent a motorcycle and I'd drive from Phan Thiet up to Quy Nhon. And I'd drive Highway 1, maybe go over to Bami Tuat and just cruise, just see the country on the back of a motorcycle.
Yeah, yeah. What besides giving you medical knowledge, how do you think Vietnam has shaped you as to who you are today?
Boy, that's a tough question. I don't know. It's certainly helped me focus and be dedicated to what I'm doing. I don't know that I've had any deleterious effects from it.
Sure.
I don't make friends easily. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
One of the things you learn over there is you don't make real close friends because you lose them.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard question to say.
Sure. Did people think you'd change when you'd come back?
My folks said I did, yeah, but I didn't feel like I did.
Okay. How did they think?
They didn't say.
They just said.
My mother especially. I made the comment that that war didn't change me, and she said, "Oh, yes, it did." And I don't know what she meant by it, but
she felt it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. When you part of the reason why we're doing this series is because we don't want people to forget, or when they look at forget stories because they can be lost. The other thing that we want to do is make sure that people in the future, when they wonder about Vietnam, they can hear about it from people who were there. And importantly, when Montanans ask that question sometime into the future and they look back and they said, what was it like? They can hear it from people who grew up in the same place they did and went over there. What do you hope people in the future remember about Vietnam, whether that's 50 or 100 years from now?
And just that there were enough people who cared to serve their country and not just serve the country, but serve each other. Because that's what we did. We weren't there for mom and apple pie. We were there for each other.
Yeah.
And that there were people who would do that, and I hope there are people who do it in the future.
Yeah.
I would like to ask people to remember those who were lost. Specifically, the guys I knew were lost. There were 2 medics killed while I was there, 1 crew chief. There was an entire crew lost before I got there, and another crew lost after I left. And
wow.
The guys I knew were killed. I'd like them to remember. Theodore High was a medic. John Thrasher was a medic. Jack Wolf, crew chief. I flew a lot with him. Good guy.
Right.
And I'd like him to be remembered.
Did you all fly all together as a team, or was there would you go on a medic? Were you assigned to one particular ship, or were you...
The last 6 months, they changed the system. The first 6 months, I'd fly with a different ship, different crew chief every day. The last 6 months, I was assigned to one ship and one crew chief. Tom Roberts was my crew chief. He passed away last year, lived down in Texas. He passed away from liver cancer, they thought secondary to Agent Orange. And we found each other on Facebook a few years ago. That's how I know that. But I flew with him for 6 months. So
yeah, that allowed you to get to know.
Yeah, but still, we kept our distance to some degree.
Sure.
You don't want to make too close friendships.
Yeah. Did have you been or seen the Vietnam Memorial? And
I've been there twice.
How was that?
Powerful.
Yeah.
Powerful. I went there in '85. I left a little pocket Bible that I carried. I carried it the whole year in my shirt pocket right here. And I left that at the wall. And it's kind of funny. I Googled my name a couple years ago, and his article came up from the Catholic Sun magazine, and his article was on articles on things that were left at the wall. And there's my Bible, picture of it, right at the top of the article. And the article itself was about things that were left at the wall, but they just took a picture of my Bible and left it on that. And I couldn't believe it.
You're right. Why'd you leave your Bible there?
I just wanted to.
Okay.
Just wanted to.
Okay. Did you have funny times where there is happiness? Is I don't want to say joy, but is happiness something that happens there?
It wasn't all fun, all hell. I mean, yeah,
right.
It was fun. Sometimes we'd take a handheld radio and we'd go fly up the coast and find an isolated spot of beach, sit down and go body surfing. Or yeah, they were good times.
So there are good beaches.
Oh, beautiful, pristine beaches. Sometimes we'd get a case of steaks and we'd have a barbecue in the unit and drink beer and eat steaks.
That's a pretty good.
Yeah.
If there wasn't a war going on, it sounds like it'd be a heck of a thing to do.
There were a lot of good times.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
Well, I think that's an important aspect too. That this is, usually when we're talking about war, when we talk about, military experience, it gets flattened. But there's really a lot of.
There were a lot of good times.
What are the you've talked a little bit about arriving there? What I think memory and sensory are closely related. What are the sights, smells? What are the things that you remember strongly about Vietnam?
The heat.
The heat?
Yeah.
Did it get cool at night, or was it always?
It did get downright cold up in the mountains, up along the Cambodian border and up in the mountains. But mostly it was hot, especially down in the lowlands and by the beaches. Yeah.
Right. It's probably. I always think it's foolish, in certain respect, to try and get all of these. Basically. Well, 3 years of your life boiled down into one simple interview. That's foolish. But what am I missing? What haven't I covered here that's important to your story?
I think you wrung me out like a rag.
Well, that's great. You heard it here first, and I'm proud. You're the first one who said finally. No, that's excellent. I appreciate that, and I appreciate what you did, serving people when they needed it most, which was what you did. You were the medical assistant. So, and that's a particularly high risk job, and I appreciate that too. I want to thank you, Dale, for coming here and sharing your story. I want to thank you for your service, and thank you for agreeing to be part of this, because we couldn't do this series without.
Thank you for doing it. A lot of guys, it's going to be very cathartic for them, and I was somewhat reluctant, but I'm glad I did it, and I appreciate you taking the time and effort to do this.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Those words mean a great deal to me.
Thank you.
Thank you. This has been Vietnam Voices. I'm Daryl Ehrlich, and we've been visiting with Dale Lacher.